Don't make me leave. Clara Calloway said it so quietly that Ethan almost missed it. He had already opened the rear door of the black Mercedes, one hand resting on the frame, his driver waiting beneath the pale glow of the Roadside Café sign. Clara, it's late. I know. We're going home. She looked through the rain-streaked window toward the empty booth in the far corner. No, Dad. We're staying. Ethan Calloway was not a man accustomed to hearing no. At 44, he had built a billion-dollar company from a borrowed office and a second-hand laptop, turned setbacks into acquisitions, and learned to make impossible problems disappear before breakfast. If a flight was delayed, he chartered another plane. If a meeting moved, he moved the meeting. If something broke, someone fixed it. But his 12-year-old daughter had just looked him in the eyes and refused to move. Ethan slowly closed the car door. Rain whispered against the pavement, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and pine from the dark highway beyond the cafe. The neon sign above the entrance flickered twice, casting red light across the puddles. Inside, a coffee machine hissed, a spoon clicked against porcelain, and an old wall clock counted seconds nobody seemed to notice. Ethan stepped through the door. The bell gave a tired little chime. Clara was already sitting in the booth by the window. She had taken off her coat and placed it neatly beside her, as though she planned to be there for hours. Ethan sat across from her. Clara, what? Why this place? Her fingers tightened around the edge of the paper napkin. You really don't remember? Ethan looked around. The faded photographs, the cracked leather seats, the handwritten menu taped beside the register. Nothing. Should I? Clara stared at him for 3 long seconds. Then she turned toward the window. Mom remembered. The words landed softly, but Ethan felt them more sharply than any accusation. His wife, Lillian, had been gone for 3 years. Ethan rarely spoke her name, not because he had forgotten her, but because remembering her meant remembering everything he had failed to notice while she was still there. Clara, if this is about your mother, it is. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but she refused to let the tears fall. She brought me here. Ethan glanced toward the counter. An older woman named Maggie stood behind it, polishing a glass that was already clean. The woman looked at Clara, then at Ethan, and something changed in her expression. Recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. Ethan noticed it immediately. Have we met? Maggie's hand stopped moving. No, sir. Then why are you looking at me like that? Maggie lowered her eyes. Clara whispered, Dad, please. 3 words. Nothing dramatic. Yet Ethan heard something beneath them that money had never taught him to hear. Fear, grief, hope. He reached for his phone, then stopped. For once, there was no assistant to call, no driver to send, no problem to purchase away. Clara had not brought him here because she wanted something. She had brought him here because she was waiting for something. Or someone. Ethan looked at the empty booth beside the window. Who used to sit there? Clara did not answer. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Inside, the cafe became strangely still. Then Maggie slowly reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small wooden box. Your wife left this here, she said. Ethan forgot how to breathe. Clara looked down at her hands. And for the first time that night, Ethan understood that his daughter had never been refusing to leave the cafe. She had been waiting for her father to finally stay. For several seconds, Ethan did not move. The wooden box rested on the counter between him and Maggie, small enough to fit in one hand, yet somehow heavier than anything he had carried in years. Clara watched him carefully. What is that? Ethan asked. Maggie looked toward the girl. I think you already know. I do not. His voice was quiet now. Maggie placed the box on the counter. Then perhaps you should let your daughter tell you why she brought you here. Ethan turned toward Clara. You knew about this? Clara nodded. How long? A few months. Ethan leaned back. And you never told me? I tried. When? Clara swallowed. You were busy. 2 simple words. They settled between them like dust in an empty room. Ethan looked away. He wanted to defend himself. There were meetings he had canceled, vacations he had arranged, school events he had attended, gifts he had chosen personally instead of letting an assistant select them. He had been present in ways that made sense to a man who measured love through responsibility. But Clara was not looking at his calendar. She was looking at him. Maggie quietly brought over 2 cups of coffee and a mug of warm milk for Clara. Ethan noticed that the woman knew exactly what Clara liked. You come here often, he said. Clara looked down. Sometimes. Without me. Yes. Ethan felt something inside him tighten. Not anger. Something worse. The realization that his daughter had built a small private world somewhere beyond the reach of his schedule, his security team, and his carefully controlled life. "Why did you come here?" he asked. Clara traced one finger around the rim of her mug. "Because Mom did." Ethan glanced toward the wooden box again. "What is inside?" "I do not know everything." "Then why did you keep it?" Clara finally looked up. "Because Mom told Maggie not to give it to you unless I brought you here myself." Ethan went still. "She said that?" "Before she died." The cafe seemed to shrink around them. The hiss of the coffee machine faded into the background. Rain tapped against the glass in a slow, patient rhythm. Ethan looked at Maggie. "Why did my wife leave something here?" Maggie took a breath. Lillian needed somewhere she could be a mother without being watched. Ethan frowned. "Watched? Not by cameras," Maggie said gently. "By expectations." Ethan understood the word, but not yet the wound beneath it. Lillian had lived in a world where every dinner had a reservation, every vacation had an itinerary, and every family photograph had been planned days ahead. Ethan had thought that was security. Maybe to Lillian, it had sometimes felt like a cage made of beautiful things. "She brought Clara here?" he asked. "More than once." Maggie smiled faintly. They would sit by that window for hours. Lillian drank coffee. Clara had hot chocolate. They talked about ordinary things. Ethan stared at the booth. "What ordinary things?" Maggie looked at Clara. "Ask your daughter." Clara's eyes filled again. "Mom used to ask me what I would do if nobody knew my last name." Ethan lowered his gaze. Clara continued. "She said I should learn who I am before everyone else tells me who I am supposed to be." Ethan heard the words, but something deeper was beginning to surface. Lillian had not been trying to take Clara away from him. She had been trying to give their daughter a place where money did not answer every question. Ethan reached toward the box, but Clara stopped him. "Not yet." He looked at her hand, then at her face. "Why not?" Clara whispered. "Because you always open things too fast." Ethan almost smiled, but the expression disappeared when she added, "You did that with Mom too." Silence returned. Maggie turned away and gave them the privacy neither of them knew how to ask for. Ethan sat there, listening to the rain, realizing that his daughter had not brought him to this cafe to punish him. She had brought him because there was something her mother had left behind, and somehow, after 3 years of silence, Clara believed her father was finally ready to hear it. Clara kept her hand over the wooden box. Ethan did not reach for it again. For once, he waited. "You are right," he said. Clara looked surprised. "About what?" "I opened things too fast." Her expression softened, but only for a moment. "Mom used to say that." Ethan looked toward the rain-dark window. "Your mother said a lot of things I did not understand. She tried to make you understand." "I know." Clara shook her head. "No, Dad. You know now." The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of 3 years. Maggie placed a small plate of cinnamon toast in front of Clara and returned behind the counter. Ethan watched his daughter take one piece. She ate slowly, like she had done this many times before. "Did Mom always bring you here?" he asked. "Not always." "When did she start?" Clara hesitated. "After you missed my school concert." Ethan remembered that night immediately. He had been in Chicago for a company meeting. His private jet had landed late. He had sent flowers, a new tablet, and a message saying he was proud of her. At the time, he had believed he had done everything he could. Now Clara's eyes told him the truth was smaller and more painful. She had only wanted him in the audience. "I thought you liked the tablet," Ethan said quietly. Clara gave him a sad little smile. "I did. But it was not you." Ethan lowered his eyes. 3 words. 3 years of meaning. Outside, a truck passed on the highway, its headlights sweeping briefly across the cafe walls. Clara watched the light disappear. "Mom brought me here the next Saturday," she said. "She said we could have a day where nobody expected anything from us." Ethan looked at the old photographs behind the counter. "What did you do?" "We had breakfast. That is all. We talked." Ethan almost laughed at the simplicity of it. "About what?" Clara shrugged. "School. Friends. Books. What kind of house I would live in when I grew up." "Did she tell you about me?" Clara's fingers stopped around the toast. "Sometimes." Ethan waited. "What did she say?" Clara looked directly at him. "She said you loved us." Ethan exhaled slowly. "That sounds like her. But she also said love is not supposed to be something people have to prove by buying things." Ethan's face changed. He looked at the expensive watch on his wrist, then at the polished shoes that had cost more than Maggie probably earned in a week. For the first time, none of it made him feel successful. Did she say I was a bad father? Clara immediately shook her head. No, then what did she say? Clara looked toward the wooden box. She said you were a good man who had forgotten how to be present. Ethan swallowed. Maggie quietly turned the sign on the door from open to closed. The cafe became even quieter. Ethan stared at the box. What happened after that? Clara's voice dropped. Mom started coming here more often. Why? Clara looked down at her mug. Because she knew she was sick. Ethan's breathing slowed. He had known Lillian had been ill. He had known about the appointments, the specialists, the treatments, the long nights. But he had always believed he knew the whole story. Clara whispered. She did not want you to spend every minute trying to fix her. Ethan looked at her. Why did she not tell me? Clara's eyes filled. Because you would have tried to save everything except the one thing she really wanted. Ethan could barely speak. What was that? Clara finally lifted her gaze. Time. The word hung in the quiet cafe. Ethan looked at the unopened box again, and suddenly he was no longer afraid of what was inside. He was afraid of what it might prove about the years he had spent believing that providing for his family was the same as being there for them. For a moment, Ethan could not look at his daughter. The rain kept tapping against the windows, steady and patient, while the old wall clock moved through another minute. Time, he repeated softly. Clara nodded. She wanted time with you. Ethan rubbed his hands together and stared at the wooden box. Why did she leave this here? Because she knew you would try to understand everything at once. Ethan almost smiled. Your mother knew me too well. Clara looked toward the counter. She knew you better than you think. Maggie returned with a fresh pot of coffee, but she did not interrupt. She simply placed it on the warmer and walked back toward the kitchen. Ethan watched her disappear. Clara, he said, what happened the last time Mom was here? Clara's shoulders became still. You have to promise you will not get angry. I promise. And you cannot call anyone. Ethan frowned. Anyone? Your assistant. Your driver. Your lawyer. Nobody. Why? Clara looked at the box. Because Mom said you would want to. Ethan understood immediately. That was exactly what he would have done. He would call someone. Someone would investigate. Someone would search records, check dates, find names, and turn a painful memory into a problem with a solution. But this was not a problem. It was a part of his family he had never known. Okay, he said. Clara studied him. Really? Really? She slowly removed her hand from the box. Ethan did not touch it. Instead, he asked, what did your mother tell you? Clara looked down at her hot chocolate. She told me that if I ever brought you here, I should make you sit down first. Ethan glanced at the empty booth. Why? Because you never sit still when something hurts. Ethan's eyes lowered. That was painfully accurate. He had spent years building a life where every difficult feeling could be covered by motion. Meetings, flights, deals, schedules, more work, more plans, anything that kept silence away. She knew, Clara continued, that one day I would need to tell you something. What? Clara's fingers curled around the mug. That I was there. Ethan looked up. Where? Clara's voice became almost a whisper. Here. When Mom got sick. Ethan stared at her. I thought you were at home. Sometimes I was. Clara. She brought me here when she did not want me to worry. Ethan's expression softened. Why would she bring you to a roadside cafe? Because nobody knew us here. Clara glanced toward Maggie. Nobody cared that Dad was a billionaire. Nobody cared what house we lived in. Nobody asked Mom how much money we had. She paused. They just asked what we wanted for breakfast. Ethan looked around the room again. Suddenly, the chipped mugs and worn booths seemed different. This place had given his wife something he had spent years trying to give her with expensive gifts and perfect arrangements. A place where she could simply be Lillian. Did she talk about me? Ethan asked. Clara nodded. A lot. His eyes lifted. Good things. Clara gave him a small smile. Mostly. Ethan let out a quiet breath. Mostly. She said you loved us. She also said you were scared. Scared of what? Clara looked at him for a long moment. Of losing everything. Ethan looked at the box again. I already lost her. Yes, Clara whispered. But Mom said you were so afraid of losing people that you kept trying to control everything around them. Ethan closed his eyes. The truth did not arrive loudly. It came quietly, like the rain against the glass. He had called it protection. Lillian had called it fear. Clara called it something else. Dad. Ethan opened his eyes. Yes. Mom did not want you to feel guilty. He looked at her. Then what did she want? Clara reached for the wooden box and slowly pushed it across the counter toward him. She wanted you to understand why she brought me here. Ethan finally placed his hand on the lid. Before he opened it, Clara added one last sentence. And I think you are finally ready. The wooden lid opened with a soft click. Inside was no fortune, no legal document, no expensive jewelry. There was only a folded letter, a small silver key, and a photograph of Lillian sitting beside Clara at the same cafe table. Ethan picked up the photograph first. Lillian was smiling at the camera, but Clara was looking at her mother instead. That detail stopped him. When was this taken? He asked. The last summer, Clara said. Ethan turned the photograph over. On the back, Lillian had written a date and 3 words. Remember this morning. Ethan stared at the handwriting. He knew every curve of those letters. He had once received notes from her on hotel stationery, grocery lists stuck to the refrigerator, messages beside his coffee before early meetings. But this felt different. This had been left behind for a future she knew she might not see. Ethan unfolded the letter. The first line was simple. Dear Ethan, if you are reading this, Clara brought you here. He stopped. His eyes moved to his daughter. You read this? Some of it. Why only some? Clara looked down. Because Mom told me I should wait until I was ready. Ethan returned his attention to the page. Dear Ethan, I know your first instinct will be to ask what you could have done differently. Please do not. He read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Lillian knew him. She knew that when something went wrong, Ethan searched for the missing detail, the missed appointment, the decision that could have changed the outcome. He had built his entire career that way. Find the problem. Find the cause. Fix it. But the letter continued. I do not need you to fix what happened to me. I need you to remember what is still here. Ethan's eyes moved toward Clara. She sat very still, watching him. He continued reading. Our daughter does not need a perfect father. She needs one who stays when there is nothing to fix. Ethan lowered the letter. The cafe seemed unbearably quiet. She wrote this about me, he whispered. Clara shook her head. She wrote it for you. Ethan looked at the next line. There is a difference between providing a life and sharing one. His jaw tightened. He remembered the first house he had bought for Lillian, the vacations he had arranged, the private doctors, the school he had chosen for Clara. He remembered all the things he had called love because they had cost him something. Then he remembered the school concert, the empty chair he had left behind, the tablet waiting for Clara when he finally returned home. He had thought the gift would make the absence smaller. It had not. Dad, Clara said softly. Ethan looked up. Did Mom ever say she was disappointed in me? Clara shook her head. No. Did she ever say she wanted to leave? No. Ethan looked confused. Then why did she come here? Clara glanced at the photograph. Because she wanted to remember what mattered before she got too tired. Ethan's fingers tightened around the letter. What mattered? Clara answered without hesitation. Me. Ethan looked at her. And you. The answer was so simple that it hurt. Lillian had not brought Clara to this cafe because she wanted a different life. She had brought her here because she wanted her daughter to experience something ordinary and precious. A morning without schedules. A meal without interruptions. A conversation without anyone checking the time. Ethan looked at the silver key. What does this open? Maggie finally spoke from behind the counter. The drawer beneath the old register. Ethan turned toward her. Why did you not tell me before? Maggie gave him a gentle look. Because your wife asked me not to. And now your daughter brought you here. Ethan stood and walked toward the register. Clara followed. Maggie opened the old wooden drawer with the silver key. Inside was another envelope, much smaller than the first. Ethan reached for it, but Clara suddenly whispered, Wait. He turned. She was staring at the envelope with tears in her eyes. That one is different, she said. Ethan waited. Clara took a breath. Mom told me never to let you read it unless I could tell you something first. Ethan's heart sank. What? Clara looked directly at him. The last time Mom came here, she was not alone. She was not alone? Ethan repeated. Clara shook her head. Who was with her? Clara looked toward Maggie. The older woman remained silent for several seconds, then gently said, Someone your wife trusted. Ethan felt his thoughts racing ahead. A doctor? A friend? A relative he had never met? His mind immediately began building explanations, each one more complicated than the last. Clara noticed. Dad. Ethan stopped. What? Do not start fixing it. He looked at her. I am not. You are thinking very loudly. For the first time that night, a faint smile crossed Ethan's face. It disappeared when Maggie placed the second envelope on the counter. Your wife came here 3 days before she went into the hospital for the last time, Maggie said. Ethan stared at the envelope. Who was with her? A woman. What woman? Maggie hesitated. Someone who knew Lillian before she met you. Ethan's expression changed. Her sister. No, her college friend. Maggie shook her head. Then who? Maggie looked at Clara. That is what your wife wanted you to discover through your daughter. Ethan turned to Clara. You know her? Clara nodded. I have seen her. Where? Here. Ethan felt the old instinct return. He reached for his phone. Clara immediately covered his hand. No, Clara, if there is a person involved in this, I need to know who she is. Why? Because your mother was sick, and someone was meeting her without telling me. Clara's expression softened. You see? You are doing it again. Ethan stopped. His phone remained dark beneath Clara's hand. She was right. He had turned a mystery into an investigation before understanding why it mattered. He slowly pulled his hand away. All right, he said. Tell me. Clara looked at the envelope. Mom said this woman helped her remember who she was before she became your wife. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? I do not know. Maggie finally opened the envelope herself. Inside was a single photograph. She handed it to Ethan. It showed Lillian standing outside the cafe years earlier, younger and laughing, beside a woman Ethan had never seen. The woman had dark hair, a warm smile, and one hand resting gently on Lillian's shoulder. Ethan turned the photograph over. A name was written on the back. Sarah Bennett, he read. Clara nodded. Mom called her Sarah. Ethan stared at the photograph. The name meant nothing to him. That frightened him more than if he had recognized it. How did she know Mom? He asked. Maggie answered softly. They worked together before Lillian met you. Ethan looked up. Worked where? At a small community center in Denver. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Lillian never told me about that. Maybe she did not think she needed to, Maggie said. Ethan looked back at the photograph. His wife had always seemed to him like someone whose life began when they met. He suddenly realized how unfair that assumption had been. Lillian had been a daughter, a friend, a young woman with dreams, fears, ordinary jobs, favorite places, and people who knew her before he ever arrived. Clara watched her father absorb that truth. Sarah came here with Mom because Mom wanted her to meet me, she said. Why? Ethan asked. Clara's voice became smaller. Because Mom wanted Sarah to tell me something. What? Clara looked toward the rain-covered window. She wanted me to know that Mom was happy before she got sick. Ethan lowered the photograph. And was she? Clara nodded. Yes. Ethan waited. But she also wanted Sarah to tell me something else. What? Clara looked straight into his eyes. That Mom had been trying to tell you for months that she was running out of time. The words were quiet. Ethan looked down at the letter in his hand. He remembered every calendar reminder, every medical appointment, every message Lillian had sent that he had answered with promises to talk later. He had thought later was guaranteed. Outside, the rain suddenly grew heavier, and thunder rolled somewhere beyond the highway. Maggie looked toward the dark windows. We should probably wait until the storm passes. Ethan glanced at the road. Water was already collecting along the shoulders. His driver stood outside beside the Mercedes, looking toward the sky. Clara reached for his hand. Dad. Ethan turned. What? Do not leave. He looked at the rain, then at his daughter. For once, the road could wait. Ethan sat back. Down beside her. I am not going anywhere. The storm settled over the cafe with a steady rhythm, rain striking the windows while the highway beyond them slowly disappeared behind a gray curtain. Ethan sat beside Clara, his expensive phone face down on the table. For the first time in years, he was not checking the time. He was not calling an assistant. He was simply sitting. Clara noticed. You really are staying. Ethan looked at her. I said I would. She studied his face as if testing whether the promise could survive the silence. Mom said promises were easy for you. Ethan lowered his eyes. She was right. Clara did not expect that answer. Neither did he. Maggie moved through the cafe, lowering the blinds and checking the old windows. The storm is getting worse, she said. The county usually closes this stretch when the water reaches the lower road. Ethan glanced outside. His driver was still waiting near the Mercedes, but Ethan shook his head when the man looked toward him. Tell him to come inside, Ethan said. He should not stand out there. Maggie nodded. A few minutes later, the driver entered, grateful for the warmth. Ethan asked him to sit with Maggie and have some coffee. Then he turned back to Clara. Tell me about Sarah. Clara touched the photograph. She came here with Mom 3 days before the hospital. What did they talk about? I do not know everything. What do you know? Clara hesitated. Mom told Sarah that she was worried about you. Ethan gave a quiet laugh, without humor. That sounds familiar. Not worried about your work, Clara said. Worried about you. Ethan looked at her. What does that mean? Clara stared into her mug. Mom said you were becoming a person who could solve anything except sadness. Ethan did not answer. The rain filled the silence for him. Clara continued. She said you were always planning the next thing. The next business deal. The next trip. The next doctor. The next school year. Ethan looked at his hands. I thought planning meant protecting you. Mom knew that. Then why was she worried? Clara's voice softened. Because you were planning for a future you forgot to live in. Ethan looked toward the photograph of Lillian. There it was again. The truth arriving without anger. Without accusation. Just quiet. He remembered one evening from the year before Lillian died. She had stood in their kitchen and asked him to cancel a meeting. He had promised to come home early. Then a problem at the company had kept him there until midnight. The next morning, a new watch had appeared beside her breakfast plate. He had thought it was an apology. She had looked at it and said, I wanted you, Ethan. He had kissed her forehead and promised they would have more time. He had believed those words because he needed to. Dad, Clara said. Ethan looked at her. I have something else to tell you. His expression changed. What? Clara took a breath. The last day Mom came here, she was not feeling well. Ethan's face went pale. Why did nobody tell me? Because Mom asked them not to. Clara, I was her husband. I know. Then why would she hide it? Clara's eyes filled with tears. Because she wanted one day where you did not turn her into a patient. Ethan went completely still. Maggie stopped near the counter. Even the driver looked down at his coffee. Clara reached across the table and placed her small hand over Ethan's. Mom wanted to be your wife that day, she whispered. Not your emergency. Ethan closed his eyes. Those words broke through every defense he had built around himself. He remembered Lillian laughing in the kitchen. Lillian choosing music for Sunday mornings. Lillian asking him to slow down. He had spent years remembering the hospital room. Clara was asking him to remember the woman before it. Ethan opened his eyes. What happened that day? Clara looked toward the unopened envelope. Sarah took Mom somewhere first. Where? A place Mom loved. Ethan waited. Clara's fingers tightened around his. And then Mom came here. A low rumble moved across the sky. The lights flickered once. Ethan looked at the envelope again. This time, he did not reach for it. Clara, he said quietly, whatever your mother wanted me to know, I am ready. Clara looked at him with a sadness far older than 12 years. I hope you are, Dad. Clara slowly pushed the envelope across the table. Ethan looked at it, then at his daughter. You open it, Clara said. Why me? Because Mom said it belonged to both of us. Ethan rested his hand on the envelope, but did not open it. Outside, rain streamed down the windows, and the old Café sign hummed softly above the door. What did your mother want us to know? Clara whispered. She wanted you to remember the last morning. Ethan carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small photograph. The photograph showed Lillian standing beside a lake, her hair moving in the breeze, Clara sitting beside her with a wide smile. Ethan recognized the place immediately. Lake Harper, he said. Clara nodded. Mom took me there that morning. Ethan stared at the photograph. Why did she never tell me? Because she wanted one morning without plans. He turned the paper over. Lillian's handwriting appeared beneath the date. My dearest Ethan, if Clara is sitting beside you when you read this, then perhaps she finally decided you were ready to listen. Ethan stopped reading. Clara moved closer. He continued. Please do not remember me by the hospital room. Remember the woman who laughed too loudly when she was happy. Remember the woman who hated cold coffee. Remember the woman who wanted one ordinary breakfast with her daughter and one ordinary afternoon with her husband. Ethan's eyes blurred. He kept reading. I know you believe love means protecting people from every uncertainty. I know you believe that if you work hard enough, plan carefully enough, and provide enough, nothing precious will ever be lost. But Ethan, life does not make that promise. His hand trembled slightly around the paper. Clara watched him without speaking. The next line was shorter. I did not need you to save me. I needed you to sit beside me. Ethan lowered the letter. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Maggie quietly placed another cup of coffee on the table, though Ethan had not asked for one. He looked at the cup. Black coffee, no sugar. Exactly the way Lillian used to make it for him. How did she know? He whispered. Maggie smiled sadly. She knew you. Ethan looked back at the letter. There was more. I want Clara to know that her father loved her every day, even when he did not know how to show it. Please do not let her turn my absence into a reason to doubt his love. Ethan looked at Clara. She wrote that about me? Clara nodded. She believed in you. He looked down again. Then he reached the final lines. But if there is one thing I want you to change, Ethan, let it be this. Stop trying to make tomorrow perfect. Sit with your daughter today. Listen when she speaks. Stay when she asks you to stay. Let ordinary moments be enough. Ethan could no longer hide what the words had done to him. He lowered the letter onto the table and covered his face with both hands. Clara watched him for a moment, then moved closer. Dad. Ethan looked up. I am sorry. Clara shook her head. Mom did not want you to be sorry. I know. Then what are you going to do? Ethan looked at his daughter. The question was simple. The answer had taken him years to understand. He reached for her hand. I am going to stay. Clara's eyes filled, but this time she smiled. Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket, looked at the screen, and turned it completely off. No calls. No meetings. No schedules. Nothing waiting beyond the glass mattered more than the child sitting beside him. Then the lights flickered again. Maggie glanced toward the windows. The storm had become strong enough that the county road was likely closed. Ethan's driver approached the table. Mr. Calloway, the highway is not safe for travel tonight. Ethan nodded. Then we stay here. Clara looked at him. Really? Ethan squeezed her hand. Really? And for the first time since Lillian had died, Ethan did not feel trapped by the place where he had stopped. He felt grateful for it. Because sometimes grace does not arrive as a miracle that changes the past. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet room, a child holding your hand, and one more chance to finally be present. By midnight, the storm had covered the highway in silver rain, and the roadside cafe had become a small island of warmth in the darkness. Ethan sat beside Clara in the old booth, his jacket folded beside him, his phone turned off for the first time in years. Maggie had brought them 2 blankets and a plate of cinnamon toast. The driver sat near the counter with a cup of coffee, quietly waiting for morning. Nobody rushed. Nobody checked the clock. For once, Ethan allowed the minutes to pass without trying to control them. Clara rested her chin on her hand. Are you really staying until morning? Yes. Even if the road opens? Ethan looked at her. Even then. Clara smiled faintly. Mom would like that. Ethan looked toward the photograph of Lillian on the table. I think your mother would have liked this whole night. Clara gave him a curious look. Why? Because she wanted me to learn how to sit still. Clara laughed softly. It was a small sound, but Ethan felt something inside him loosen. He had not heard that laugh often enough since Lillian died. What? Clara asked. Nothing. You are looking at me. I know. That is strange. Ethan smiled. I am allowed to look at my daughter. Clara shook her head, still smiling. You usually look at your phone. The words were playful, but Ethan understood what lived underneath them. Not tonight, he said. Maggie brought over a fresh cup of coffee. Ethan looked at it and paused. Black coffee. Maggie nodded. Your wife remembered. Ethan touched the warm cup. She remembered everything. No, Maggie said gently. She remembered what mattered. The distinction stayed with him. Near dawn, the rain finally softened. Pale light appeared behind the clouds, turning the wet highway silver. Ethan stepped outside with Clara. The air smelled clean, cold, and new. The Mercedes was still waiting, covered with tiny beads of water. Ethan looked at it, then at the road. We can go home now, he said. Clara did not move. Do you want to? Ethan looked down at her. Not yet. Clara's eyes widened. Why? He pointed toward the cafe. Breakfast. Maggie looked up from behind the counter. You too hungry? Clara smiled. Very. They returned to the same booth. Ethan ordered pancakes for Clara and eggs for himself. No private chef. No reservation. No perfect schedule. Just breakfast. While they waited, Clara took the photograph of Lillian from the table. Can we keep this? She asked. Ethan nodded. Of course. Where will you put it? Ethan thought for a moment. Somewhere I can see it every day. Clara studied him. Not your office? Ethan smiled. No. Somewhere I actually live. Clara understood immediately. When the food arrived, Ethan put his phone away again. Clara began telling him about a book she had been reading. Ethan listened. He asked questions. He laughed when she laughed. And when she stopped talking for a moment, he did not rush to fill the silence. He simply stayed beside her. Months later, the cafe still looked much the same. Ethan repaired the roof, replaced the cracked windows, and quietly made sure Maggie never had to worry about keeping the doors open. But he never bought the cafe. He never changed its name. Every Sunday morning, he and Clara returned to the booth by the window. Sometimes they talked about Lillian. Sometimes they talked about school. Sometimes they said almost nothing. One morning, Clara looked across the table and asked, "Dad, do you remember why we stayed that night?" Ethan smiled. "Because your mother wanted us to." Clara shook her head. "Not exactly." Ethan waited. Clara reached across the table and took his hand. "We stayed because you finally learned how." Ethan looked at his daughter, then at the rain beginning softly against the glass. He understood then that redemption had never required him to rewrite the past. It only required him to stop running from the present. He could not give Lillian another morning. He could not recover the missed concerts, the unanswered questions, or the ordinary moments he had mistaken for guaranteed tomorrows. But he could give Clara this morning, and the next one, and the one after that. Sometimes grace does not arrive with wealth, applause, or miracles. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a roadside cafe, across a worn wooden table, when someone you love asks you to stay. And sometimes the greatest second chance a father can receive is not the chance to become perfect. It is the chance to finally be there.